So Gina, when Betsy was in labor, I thought she would really appreciate the fact that I went out and got a chocolate milkshake. Because she was very fond of them when she was pregnant. So I thought, well, she must really want one then. But I found out the quick answer to that was no. So. So I'd like to take us on a detour this morning. Anyone ever been on a detour? Yeah, I think, yeah. So a good detour, we know it's a good detour because we will end up at the place where we would have ended up without the detour, right? The place where we initially set out to go. So my detour is this. When we come together here on Sunday mornings, we expect to talk about God, and we will. And when we open up the scriptures, we expect the conversation to be about God, and in part, it is. But what we so often overlook is that the Bible isn't just a theology book, theology meaning the study of God. It's an anthropological book. It's not simply a story of God with us, it's a story of us with God. Now, honestly, we don't spend most of our lives thinking about the meaning of God, but we do spend a good portion of our life thinking about the meaning of life. Right? Why am I here? You know, what is my place? Will I be remembered? If I am remembered, what will I be remembered for? Excuse me. So it's actually a search for the meaning of us. And so today for the next couple of weeks, I want to talk about what is really one of our favorite subjects, and that is us. Us human beings. So I want to invite you into a conversation about what it means to be us, what it means to be human, us in the fullest sense. So wherever anyone is, wherever you are, wherever those of you listening, watching live later on in the week, wherever you are in your faith journey, this will be relevant to you because whether or not you believe in God, whether you're a person who finds faith to be central to who you are or not, if faith is a place you occasionally visit or faith is at the very foundation of your understanding of life, the one place you are all the time is with you. And the one place you are all the time is in close proximity to others as we all spin around on this third rock from the sun. So I'm calling this series Connecting in a Disconnected Time out of my belief that there are few more vital or critical conversations to be had right now than how to connect to others. Now, I know in some ways it's counterintuitive to come to a space where you think the entire focus is going to be on connecting to God. And here we are talking about the critical importance of connecting to others. But I would suggest that this conversation was actually initiated by God because God created us to be in relationship. And yes, God created us for this vertical relationship. God created us for this relationship to God, but God also created us for relationship to one another. And so this is really a discussion about coming to understand how God designed us for each other. Now, in some ways, it shouldn't be hard for us to be human, right? Human should come naturally for us. It should be easy. Being human should come as natural as it is to breathe. I mean, lions know how to lion, right? Beavers know how to beaver. Tigers know how to tiger. Hummingbirds know how to hum. And the Eagle Cam, many of you have been watching the Eagle Cam. That's very popular. Yeah, it's just fascinating. I've just heard that maybe one of the eagles, the little chicks, didn't make it. But it's just, Ma and Pa Eagle, they know what they're doing. I mean, no one had to teach them. It's just, that comes naturally. Well, connecting for us to one another should be simple. How is it that we'd be created for each other and yet at the same time find ourselves so disconnected from one another? And so today I want to talk about an attribute that I think is critical in making human connections, making deep human connections. And ironically, it's something, a lot of us got the speech, a lot of us got the talk when we were growing up, and some of us gave the talk to our kids. If you're ever going to be successful, you need to, and you can fill in the blank there. I was raised old school. If you're gonna be successful, you got to get an education. Got to go to college. If you don't finish college, you'll never have a job. You'll never succeed. You won't get anywhere. Now, if someone is raised in a trades house, they might hear, man, if you don't get a trade, if you don't learn how to be a plumber, a pipe fitter, if you don't learn how to be this or that, said you're never gonna amount to much. You'll never get anywhere. Or perhaps you heard the talent talk. You've got to find your talent. You've got to find your skill set. You have to find, you'd better be intelligent, young man or young woman, or you're never going to amount to anything in life. Excuse me. But what we're never told is that if you're going to be successful, whether that's financial or in status or recognition or prestige, but you don't have this one thing, you're gonna check out of this life with all of those other things you will have accumulated. You will leave this world vacuous, word I wanted to throw in today, if you lacked empathy. We didn't hear that talk. I'd be surprised. Did anyone hear the empathy talk growing up? Yeah, probably not. I didn't. See, I'm of the conviction that empathy is one of the most important characteristics in our human connecting. So this past week, I heard someone give a quote on empathy, and the quote was, "Empathy is a huge weakness." Anyone want to guess who gave that quote? Oh, we know. So some of you heard that. Elon Musk gave that quote. That's not all that shocking. In response to that, this gentleman, George Lakoff, said this. He said, democracy depends on empathy. I thought, wow, there's a good juxtaposition. Now, who's George Lakoff? Well, I had to look it up. He's retired as the Distinguished Professor of Cognitive Science and Linguistics at the University of California at Berkeley. So I thought, well, I'll try to read something of his. And I soon realized I can't read what that guy wrote, but I did like his simple definition. Simpler, I'm going to say that empathy is simply the ability to step into someone else's reality. That's empathy. The ability to walk in someone else's shoes. So how many of us have ever felt misunderstood? I got time. I think you should all see all the hands, right? Yeah. One of our greatest struggles is to be understood. Don't judge me. Don't respond to me. Or do whatever without taking the time to listen to me, to finish the sentence, to know what I'm trying to say, to feel what I'm trying to express. But paradoxically, we go through most of our lives oblivious to how we are often unaware of how little we take the time to understand others. So David Brooks wrote this book. I have read it through twice and just starting my third time. So in the first chapter, we just started this in our Wednesday night little gathering. In our first chapter, it's entitled The Power of Being Seen, all right? And he's talking about being a diminisher, all right? So a diminisher is someone who makes other people feel small. We've had diminishers in our lives, haven't we? Yeah. Unseen. And then he says, the flip side of that, there are illuminators. Illuminators have a persistent curiosity about other people. I love those definitions. And so he asks the question, how good are you at understanding and taking the time to understand other people? Excuse me. And then he follows with this. He says, I probably don't know you personally. That's a pretty good chance of an author saying that. But I can make the following statement with a high degree of confidence. You're not as good as you think. Yeah, I couldn't agree more for my life. That's why I'm going through the book for a third time. That's why I suggested this book for the group, because hopefully we are all diving in and asking, how can we be better illuminators? How can we be better at hearing those around us? So now, as a people of faith, we take this truth and we hold it up and we say, well, gee whiz, most of all, what matters to me, what matters to us, is that God understands me. And I don't know about you, but I get a little worried when I read a passage like this from the book of Isaiah, where Isaiah wrote down, speaking as the oracle from God, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. Well, if we take that as it says, how could God ever have any empathy towards us, right? Because I think it's safe to say that God is outside of our reality, way outside of our reality. So how could God ever have any empathy towards me? Seems to me only one way. If God were to decide to give up God's divinity and become human, which we know is exactly what God did, coming to us in the person of Jesus. And if it was an experiment, excuse me, and dare say that it was an experiment, if you want kind of the theological underpinnings for that, you could plow your way through the book of Hebrews. This experiment was a success. Yeah. The little verse, the shortest verse, we're often told the shortest verse in the Bible, right, is recorded in what we call Luke chapter 14. Rob read for us. See, that little verse would lead us to understand that while Isaiah's passage ruled the day in the way back time, that all that understanding changed with the coming of Jesus. So here's the story. Now, excuse me, I said Luke, it was John. John liked to tell long stories. Mark's stories are always short. John's stories are often quite long. So here's the Reader's Digest. So Jesus is in another town about 30 miles north. And they come to him, word traveled fast even back then. He said, hey, this guy Lazarus, your friend, he's dying. And again, we don't know how they made these connections, but somehow they knew Jesus cared about him. Oddly enough, Jesus wasn't in any hurry. I don't know if he needed to, go pick up a robe at the dry cleaners, or, if he needed to, go to the bakery and pick up another, loaf of matzah or whatever. But he didn't hurry. So he spends a couple of days, we're told, doing we don't know what. And while Jesus was being detained and having no sense of urgency, Lazarus dies. His sisters, Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, well, as any of us would have been, they're devastated, yeah? So Jesus comes onto the scene. I mean, it's a big, there's a lot of weeping and wailing. Everyone's mourning, and Jesus shows up, and as we can imagine it, they're thinking, oh yeah, great, now you show up, right? Nice of you not to hurry. You're a little late, Jesus. Thank you very much. So again, we're I think hypothesizing, but it's not all that far, that they would be thinking, you don't need to talk to me about my pain when you could have come. You don't need to talk about my faith or my lack of faith or whatever it might be. I don't need some teaching moment, Jesus. I don't need you to tell me what I need to know. I need to know why you didn't show up. Now, I don't know about you, but was there ever a time in your life, as in mine, where you thought, well, Jesus, you weren't there when I needed you. Where were you when I needed you? And after they asked Jesus, why was it that you didn't show up? The recorded response is, Jesus wept. Now, we live a long removed time from them. And in another sense, one of the things that they had that we simply, for the most of us, lack, they lived in a world of lots of different mythologies. There was the Greek mythology and the Norse and the Roman and the Egyptian and all of these stories, because they were great storytellers. And all of these stories portrayed that those gods, if they engaged with us at all, that humanity, human beings, you and I and they, were just chess pieces in this divine game of chance. There was no understanding of a God who could have genuine compassion for them, much less empathy. It was so human. We just can't, this is so ingrained in us and so foreign to them. We have this moment where God steps into human history, takes on flesh and blood, walks among us, and in the middle of this moment of darkness and death and despair and pain and sorrow and loss and suffering, Jesus weeps. I want to be like that. I want to be like Jesus. Now, when you come here or listening live or whatever, is that your hope? Is that your prayer? You say, I want to be better. That's why I'm here. My sense is that down through the years, that has not always been, or maybe I dare say even often been, the prayers of people walking in. They were here out of routine, they were here out of ritual, they were here out of this, they were here out of that. But their primary reason was not to say, oh Lord, here I am. I want to be a better person. John Wesley, the founder of our church, the Methodist Church, now the United Methodist Church, went so far, his prayer was that when you came into God's presence, that you would actually, if you kept doing that, and that was your sincere prayer, say, Lord, I want to be better, Lord, I want to be better, Lord, I want to be better. He said, you can reach perfection in this life. But see, we say, no, that can't happen. Well, why do we say, no, that can't happen? Because we don't believe it can happen, and we don't pray that it will happen. And so we, not singing today, one of my favorites, Love Divine, All Love's Excelling, Charles Wesley, John's brother, we sing, take away our bent to sinning. See, we understand that our life is going to go this way without the help of the Almighty One. So you remember the commercial. I want to be like Mike, right? The goat. Isn't that a weird word, goat? The greatest of all time. I want to be like Mike. Well, who in their mind wouldn't be? But let's never be deceived to think that his life was perfect. His life had pain and a lot of emptiness as well. Jesus was not the cold, aloof, distant observer of human experience, and he wasn't weeping because he lost something. Do we think for a moment that Jesus was confused about his power over death? Do we think for a moment Jesus felt as if he came too late to the party? Or that he was defeated, or there was no way of reversing the situation? Jesus didn't weep because of what he was feeling. He wept because of what he experienced their feeling. And see, what I think is so odd is that so oftentimes we project on God who we are. And for some, there's this coincidence that God just happens to hate the same people they do. It's really convenient. We often say or acknowledge that we want to be like Jesus, but we act as if God lacks empathy, right? Because if we really want to be like God, if we really want to be like Jesus, then our lives will bend towards the direction of being more fully empathetic. See, for some, God's all about judgment and condemnation and anger and retribution. For others, and God is always trying to hold others accountable with all too little regard for their own thoughts or our own thoughts and our own attitude. See, one of the things I've noticed over my lifetime, and many of you have as well, is the loss of empathy in our culture. I mean, boy, oh howdy, we are on the bullet train right now to diminishing empathy. But we don't use that word a lot, do we? We're talking more about narcissism. That's probably a word that's a whole lot more familiar to our vocabulary today than it was 5, 6, 8, or 10 years ago. Narcissism, common in our culture. And we understand what it means to be a narcissist. We see it play out regularly on the tube or on the internet. We see it in everyday real life, and dare I say too often in our own lives as well. They say, well, Pastor, careful you're meddling now, right? I'm not a narcissist. Or maybe someone's thinking, well, I am, but I don't think anybody knows. They're not smart enough to know. And we get this understanding or concept of narcissism from a Greek story about a guy named Narcissus, who, as the story goes, understood himself to be the most attractive warrior ever to live. Now, people would fall for this guy, but no one ever measured up to his understanding of himself. So he remained forever single. As he thought, the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. And as the story goes, one day he went by a pool or a pond, and upon seeing his reflection of this most beautiful creature, he had to have it. And so he dove into the pond and he drowned. So we have a culture where we're becoming increasingly culturally numb to drowning in self-love. But Pastor, we're supposed to love ourselves, right? You shall love the Lord your God with all their heart, soul, strength, and mind. Then you shall love your neighbor as yourself, right? Yeah. So if you want to take your narcissistic temperature, you can ask yourself, how much empathy do I have? What's your empathy temperature for others? Now, I used to think that people who are highly narcissistic didn't feel deeply, but I think I don't go that direction anymore. I think narcissists do feel deeply. In fact, they have deep feelings and they expect everyone to understand them. But they don't give a hoot. They don't give a 2 cents about others. And as many of you have discovered, it's really difficult to have a conversation with a narcissist because whatever they're feeling is right. Whatever they're feeling is factual. Speak facts or truth to a self-absorbed person, and they will often, they'll become hurt, angry, offended. How dare you talk to me like that? And one of the characteristics of narcissism, which is so important to raise, is as opposed to empathy, when you're a narcissist, you're just less generous in life, right? So anyone who wants to increase your empathy, you increase your generosity, and you'll decrease your narcissism. Because when you're a narcissist, you can't think of a better cause to give to than yourself. Why would you want to give to something else when you're the most important cause in the world? So what I'd like to do is ask you to consider what's holding you back from connecting more deeply with other people. So I watched a short video a few days ago. It's one of those clips, one of those reels, shorts, whatever. And it was a conversation about narcissism, and it was really discouraging because the therapist was explaining that narcissism isn't biological. It's not genetic. It's environmental. In other words, the therapist was saying, our kids will learn our attitude towards others and our care from others as we raise them in the nest. Just like those little eagles are going to figure out how to be an eagle from Ma and Pa, our ability to, or lack of ability to connect with others are going to be from that home brood just like those eagles. That they're going to pick up on all that we care about or our lack of care for others. And what that therapist was saying was really disconcerting, because what he went on to say was that once that die is cast, that it can't be changed. And that's where I took umbrage to his little short reel, because I believe there's nothing, no structure in our lives that's not irreversible to God. There's no arena in our lives, in psychological or any other pact, that can't be transformed by the presence of Jesus. When you walk through that door, when you open the book and you say, I want to be more like Jesus. But you have to see empathy as a strength and not a weakness. We have to break away from this mindset. Hey, if I care about people, if I put myself out there, I'm going to become vulnerable. And in doing so, I can become, set myself up for disappointment and loss. And I just don't think I want to go there. Say thanks, but no thanks. Instead, I hope that we'll see the power of being able to vicariously step into someone else's space and to weep for them. So when was the last time you really entered into someone else's pain and listened? Really listened to them? Excuse me. So the guy that I talked about a couple of weeks ago, well, that job didn't last very long, and so he needed some more money, and so I met with him. And a lot of times it's like drop off and just give him, here's the money. And this time I thought, preaching to myself, I thought, hey, tell me, his name wasn't Steve, but Steve, what's life like for you? And I learned an awful lot just by asking that simple question. It wasn't just a transaction of here's $40, but what's life like? And and it's the typical, well, I've got a felony, and and it's hard, they find out, and so I can't get, but I listened, to him in a way that I hadn't listened before. So it's fascinating to me that right after the author records that Jesus wept, the very next verse says they looked at Jesus and they said, my, how he loved them. Because if you want to understand the power of empathy, it's love. They looked at Jesus and knew that Jesus loved Lazarus. He just didn't love Lazarus. He loved Mary and Martha. He loved those who were in pain, and he stepped into their pain and he carried it with them. So how empathetic are you? May I quote David Brooks? You're not as good as you think. What's it mean to be human? To be fully human, to live as Jesus lived, caring deeply for others? All others. So here I'm going to reference last week's scripture real quick. We need to be mindful of Jesus' words where he says, if you only love those who love you, if you only care for those who care for you, if you're only willing to engage in a thoughtful conversation with those who share your same thoughts, of what credit is that? That, sisters and brothers, is our challenge. Amen.